Hello, everyone. Welcome to Growing Up in Idaho. Today, we're going to be talking about the good old days from around 1927. In today's story, we'll mention some areas around Passamaquoddy and Forney and Yellow Jacket. So if you're interested in those areas and the history of them and some of the people that lived in and around those areas, you'll enjoy today's story. This story was taken from the memoirs of Harry Hicks. And in 1974, Harry sat down and pinned out his life history. And he mentioned everything he could recall, which were all the old folk, the old people from the Salmon Valley and the areas around there. And Harry was kind of a colorful character. And he grew up in Salmon and Passamaquoddy. And in this episode today, you're going to hear his story of his family's migration from their homestead in Passamaquoddy over to Forney and then on to Yellow Jacket. To lay the foundation for this story, keep in mind Harry's dad and mother, Vic and Clyda Hicks, were trying to figure out a good, stable life for their little family. They bought a piece of ground in Passamaquoddy, but it wasn't making money for them because they couldn't get enough water to even grow a garden, according to Harry. And as you know, if you've ever been around farming or ranching, you have to have water. It's the lifeblood of your operation. And if you can't get enough water, then it's not going to work. And you have to find something else to do. And so that's where they were at. And so Vic, Harry's dad, went up and did some timber work in Patterson with his big team of horses that we'll hear about later. And that job petered out after a while. And so Vic and Clyda decided to move to Yellow Jacket, where Vic would use his big team of horses to work around the mines there. And incidentally, the Yellow Jacket mine had ramped up around the year before, I think 1926. So that was an opportunity, and they just were going to go over and see if they could find out if there was any work over there. And so I'm just going to pull straight from Harry's memoir. And we'll start out with them leaving Passamaquoddy. The first day, we headed up to the Morgan Creek Divide. Mom and Dad rode in the covered wagon seat. That prize team of horses, Dot and Jip. I remember their hooves were the size of the bottoms of a nail keg. They weighed 2,200 pounds each. I've seen my Uncle Earl, as good a teamster as Dad, risk his life as a showman by tricking on the performance of that team, by casting aside the lines and directing the horses by talk alone. Up a little, whoa, back, and so on. When Dot and Jip got old, Dad sold the team to the city of Salmon, where they sprinkled the streets, pulling the sprinkler wagon up and down the streets to settle the dust. The old fellow that drove them would crawl off the water wagon and visit with someone on the street, or get a shot of bootleg and catch the team on the way back to the filler hydrant. The first night, we camped above the old Kingsbury Ranch on what was Big Creek, now Panther Creek. While Dad made camp, Mom caught enough big trout for supper and breakfast the next morning. She tied a knot loop in a string and flipped the fish out of the water onto the bank. That night, after eating the fish, we sat by the fire and told stories until I fell asleep. The next day, we pulled into the stage station on Big Creek in Forney. The place was run by a typical French pioneer, Milt Merritt, with his big moss horn mustache and broken French language. Mom got a job working there as a cook for the freighters that stopped in, and for the pilgrims, the salesmen, and the miners and such that came along the road. Dad went on to Yellow Jacket to find us a place to get settled in. My sister and I started school in Forney. The schoolhouse was a mile or so below town. The O'Connor kids went to school there too. I would meet every freight string of wagons as they came in, and I got to know them all. There was Hilliard Griebler, who was from Tennessee and drove an 8 or 10 mule hitch. He had a jockey box full of rocks and would cuss and throw rocks to the leaders of his string because he couldn't reach them with his whip. Then there was Feral Terry, a gentle saint, but all man, who had a great sense of humor. I later worked for him in the CCCs. I remember Charlie Mitchell, the stage driver. His boy Charlie and I went to school together in Salmon later on. Then there was Kurt Roberts, another ring-tailed, rootin'-tootin', mean son of a gun from Tennessee, same as Rufus Isley. So that's the end of the first section of Harry's story. Incidentally, I did some research and found a really interesting volume of Idaho history that was given in interview form. And it was given by none other than a man named Wayne O'Connor, who was from the O'Connor family that lived in Forney when Harry Hicks and his family went through there. And the interview that he gave was done in 1969. And let me give you a little history of the O'Connor family. They migrated to Idaho from Iowa in the 1890s. Wayne was the son of Frank and Belle O'Connor, and he was born in 1897. And the O'Connors moved to Forney in 1907 and lived on the ranch there for some time. And this interview I found was given to Don Smith in Salmon in 1969, like I mentioned. And Wayne discussed events in Forney near the same time the Hickses went through. And incidentally, Wayne's father drove the mail route to the Singheiser mine, Myers Cove, and on into Yellow Jacket. And he had an unfortunate incident in 1912, was thrown from a horse and was killed. And so after Wayne's father died, the rest of the family continued to keep the ranch up there in Forney. And according to this Wayne O'Connor, Milt Merritt's name was actually Malcolm Benjamin Merritt. Now, this is the guy who ran the stage station there in Forney. But people generally just called him Milt or Malk for short. And according to Wayne O'Connor, this Merritt was a little short, heavy-set fellow and was crooked as could be. He was in the horse stealing business for a long time until the government got after him. And then he'd been into so much trouble and been in the courts and everything over shooting at people and stealing cattle and so on. And then O'Connor went on to say that nobody felt very bad when somebody shot and killed this Merritt. Even the sheriff, Tommy Stroud, didn't care that much. Of course, the police, the sheriff, investigated the incident. So he and his deputy, Von Clark, interviewed a number of individuals about the incident and tried to see if there was any evidence on who might have done it. But everyone had a solid alibi, and the case was eventually dropped and closed. So the year this Merritt was killed was 1934. And that interview with Wayne O'Connor from 1969 can be found on the internet. If any of you are interested in having a copy of that, I will send it to you in PDF form. Anyway, so we'll continue Harry's story from his memoir. He said, later that fall, we were to leave the schoolhouse at Forney, and Mother was to leave the cooking job, and we were to move over to Yellow Jacket. The road, as I remember, went up the same side creek where Forney was located, not the canyon where the O'Connor Ranch is now. Mrs. O'Connor, incidentally, raised several good boys and girls there on that ranch after her husband's death in 1912. I believe I knew all of them. They're scattered all over now, same as we all are. We got an early start out of Forney. I remember the sounds the horses made as they pulled the two wagons with our stuff and junk, the creak of the leather and the jingle of the chains and the smells of the horses and the plump, plump, plump of those huge feet as they set down on everything. I could hardly keep my head on my shoulders as I kept rocking around. This part of the road was creek bottom and was extremely rough. It became easier, however, as the road began to rise and climb. Along in the evening, we came to the town of Yellow Jacket. That had its beginning through Mr. Steen. Much later, my wife and I were to get to know the son of Mr. Steen, a man in his 40s, Heber Steen, and we became good friends. What a thrill it was to see the town itself. Such a hurry and scurry of building. There was a carnival-like attitude in everyone. And the change in the dress confirmed each kind of worker. The general working type men wore overalls and logger boots and jackets. The company men wore tight-legged pants and tight-laced boots. We pulled our wagons in at the wagon yard. The big team shook their harnesses and gave a big sigh. Everyone gathered around our outfit to see such a big team of horses, and the men began to carry on a familiar conversation with Father. Some of the men had already heard about the big team that had come up from the Camas Prairie several years before. They had seen them in Chalice at a big pulling contest there. After the talk, we put the horses in the barn where they had to duck their heads to enter. They were so big. Then they called for grain with a soft, coaxing whinny. They were fed hay and oats, and then we broke open an extra bale of hay, as we would all be sleeping in the barn too. Harry Hicks's Memoirs.